Hello, my name is Helen Dexter. I'm the course convener for PL7505 International Security. These slides are here just to introduce you to our course and to get you thinking critically about the concept of security. And in this context, thinking critically about security means to challenge assumptions and to ask questions about knowledge that's really taken for granted. We're going to be considering questions that are the centre of contemporary security studies. So questions we'll be thinking about are, when talking about security, what is it that we think we should be securing? In other words, what is the referent object of our security? We'll think about the question, what does it mean to be secure? What is this thing called security? And how can security be achieved? So if you have any questions about these slides, then you can email me, your course convener, or your associate tutors for this module. So PL7505, then our course. The primary aim of this module is to give students grounding in the theory and practice of international security in the contemporary era. In the first part of the course, you'll discuss the major theoretical perspectives on security, before we then go on to discuss some of the issues or problems those theories try, not always successfully, to address. The goal is to encourage you to draw upon and critically evaluate the ability of the main theories and concepts of security studies to analyse international security. The course aims to develop in students the ability to think critically and constructively about the key debates in international security studies and about the real-world choices confronting policymakers. Security, then, our subject for this module, has always been central to the study of international politics. It was the horrors of the First World War that really inspired the academic discipline of international relations, and security studies can be seen as a sub-discipline of international relations. During the Cold War, security studies concerned itself with how to keep the state secure from external military threats, particularly the threat of nuclear weapons. But with the end of the Cold War, some scholars began to argue that the nature of security threats had changed, and security studies as a discipline has undergone much change. So we can say that security studies is central to international relations, with a big I and a big R, as in the discipline of international relations, the academic discipline of international relations. And we can say that it's at the centre of international relations with a little I and a little R, as in the politics of states. Security is a very elusive concept, and it's now considered a contested concept. It's also a very powerful term. Much can be done in the name of security, but there's little agreement about what security actually means. And it's these issues and the politics of security that we're going to be addressing. So one of our main questions then, what is security and how is it achieved? Well, security, as I've said, is a contested subject. There's no definitive definition. Traditional security studies was very state-centric. Security was provided by states and for states. Traditional security studies focused on military power. So typical subjects that we might have studied would be interstate war, territorial disputes, security dilemmas, arms races and arms control. And these are the topics that you might think are kind of standard topics that we would be discussing on a security studies module. Traditional security practices were deterrence, compellence, alliance systems and arms control, just as an example. But as I said, towards the end of the Cold War, particularly in the 1980s, thinking about security changed. And now what's known as critical security studies developed, which is a broad church, including many different theoretical perspectives, all of which, though, are human-centred. So we're going to be looking at new ways of thinking about security in this module. There are three questions that are now at the heart of contemporary security studies, and these three questions are really going to frame our module, and these three questions we'll come back to throughout it as we look at different topics. So our first question is, what is it that should be secured? Or to put it another way, what is the referent object of security? We're going to ask the question, what does it mean to be secure? What is this elusive thing called security? And we're going to ask, how is security achieved? And we'll think about who the agents of security are. So security for whom? Or to put it another way, what should be the referent object of security? For traditional security studies, which was dominated by the theory of realism, the referent object of security would be the state. So, according to realism, given that states exist in an anarchical realm, threats to state security come from external threats, namely other states. Realism is a theory about power, and power is defined in material or military terms. So if a state feels threatened from outside, it will increase its power, and this leads to a security dilemma. The creation of the modern state system introduced the notion of national security. So if the state's threatened externally and makes itself secure through protecting its territory and its vital interests from attack. And this is what we understand by national security. This is done by accumulating military power or weapons, and security in this interpretation is the ability to coerce. And one of the things we're going to think about through this module is whether the concept of national security is still valid. So the cartoon that you can see on this slide then shows Fortress America. It's got missile defense, it's got airport security, it's searching for weapons of mass destruction, you can see a tank, and yet you can also see a little bird with bird flu that's flying over all of this. So are there some things that the state can't secure itself from? Does that mean that we need to start thinking beyond national security? It's also worth noting that bird flu or disease could now be considered as a security threat, and this is something we're going to cover in the course as well. So there are different questions we can ask about national security. Can we protect the state from external threats? With the terrorist attacks of September the 11th, a good example of the state not being able to protect itself from external threats. Are some threats beyond the scope of the state? So do they require cooperation? Do we need to think beyond national security to international or global security? Are threats against the state the only threats to the lives of individuals? We can ask questions about national security practices and whether they actually endanger the lives of individuals. So does national security actually make the individual feel safe? And we can think about human rights violations that are carried out in the name of security, civilian casualties that take place during war. We can think about terrorism and the links between national security policies and an increase in terrorism. We can see security and whether the arguments are made to trade off with security and civil liberties. A question that I like to ask is whether does airport security make you feel more or less secure? So we can ask questions about whether the state can be secured by non-military means. Climate change is a nice example of a new topic considered a security threat that perhaps questions national security. So first of all, we can ask whether climate change can be considered as a security threat. Can climate change be dealt with at the national level, or is this something that needs to be dealt with at the international or the global level? And we can ask who feels threatened by climate change and why. And it's these kind of questions that we're going to be asking throughout the course. So, new security thinking then. The end of the Cold War challenged the realist way of thinking about security. The Soviet Union collapsed due to internal structures, global capitalist institutions, and democratic ideology. It couldn't be described and it wasn't predicted by realism's focus on military power. So realism as a theory has been challenged by the end of the Cold War. Post-Cold War security studies as a concept has broadened. So critical security studies recognises that rather than provide security for many people around the world, their own state is in fact the cause of their insecurity. So we have to think about who the agents and actors in security are. New security thinking asks then whether the state should remain the referent object of security, whether it should be the state that we're trying to secure, or whether it should be the individuals within that state that we're trying to secure, and perhaps the two contradict each other. So we can look at security at different levels then. We can think of levels of analysis. And how we think about security, as I've said, depends on the referent object, that thing that it is that we're trying to secure, or our level of analysis. So we can think about security working at different levels. We can think about the security of the individual, or the human being, or what's known as human security. We can think about the security of the community, or the group. We can think about security operating at the level of the nation, of the regime, security of the state itself, of a region perhaps, or global security. And it's worth bearing in mind that these levels are not mutually exclusive and they may even contradict each other. So for security for some may mean insecurity for others. And a good question to ask as we go through this module then is, who's made insecure by a particular policy? So one of our other guiding questions then is, what does it mean to be secure? And again, how we answer this question depends on what we take as our referent object of security. So what is it that we're trying to secure will determine what it means to be secure. And in terms of national or state security, security could be said to involve the integrity of state borders, independent control of territory, economic wealth, military power, and the preservation of vital interests. And you could say if a state has those things, then it's secure. But then we could ask, what is it that makes a human being secure? And a state could have all of those things, and the individuals within that state could still feel insecure. So according to the United Nations, 1994 United Nations Development Report, this developed the idea of human security, of what it means to make a human being secure. And the report said human security can be said to have two main aspects. It means first, safety from such chronic threats as hunger, disease, and repression. And second, it means protection from sudden and hurtful disruptions in the pattern of daily life, whether in homes, in jobs, or in the community. So the Human Security Report lists 7 threats to human security, 7 threats that make a human being insecure, and they are personal security, economic security, health security, political security, community security, food security, and environmental security. So the idea of human security really broadens our subject area and broadens the topics that we can now think about in terms of security. So all of these things then on this slide could be considered a security issue and can be part of our module. So social upheaval, poverty, hunger, political crises, political repression, corruption, environmental degradation, domestic violence or gender crimes, disease, civil liberties, all of these things now are on the security agenda. And what we'll do through this module is think about what it means to consider these issues as security issues. What are the normative implications of this? So do we think it's a good thing that poverty becomes considered as a security issue? Do we think it's useful that the environment or threats to the environment are considered as security issues? So during this module then, we'll consider why some issues become securitized, as in considered as a security threat whilst others do not. And we'll consider the theoretical, political and the ethical implications of treating a growing number of non-military issues as security threats. How is security achieved? Well, international relations and its subdiscipline security studies used to be considered the realm of diplomats and soldiers. But with the broadening of security studies to include things such as human security, the agents of security, those who provide security, have also broadened. So one of the questions we'll think about is the extent to which we think the provision of security still resides within the state. So to conclude this brief introduction to our topic and to introduce you to questions of security studies, there are some things that I want you to think about the next time you hear the term security used either in academic work, in the news, or by a politician. So you can ask yourself, in this instance, what is it that's the referent object of security? So what is it that they're trying to make secure when they're talking about security? What would it mean to be secure in this context? How could we secure this referent object? And how would that be achieved? Who or what do you think is made insecure by this? And then what do you think about this? So these slides and these thoughts are designed to accompany your reading for this week and to promote discussion on the forums as well. So get involved with the forums.